Welcome to Sababoosh, the podcast of Milk and Honey. I'm your host, Jake Gillis. Join me in learning about Israeli culture from its movers and shakers. Connect with the Israel you love, or soon will. Welcome back to Sababoosh, the podcast of Milk and Honey. In this episode of Sababoosh, we're diving into the fascinating, quirky, and sometimes surprising world of the Hebrew language. From ancient roots to modern slang, our guest, Elon Gilad, is a journalist, author, and language enthusiast whose work explores how Hebrew evolved, adapted, and reinvented itself over thousands of years. We'll talk about the revival of Hebrew, the forces that shaped it into the language that's spoken in Israel today, and the slang that keeps it alive and ever-changing. Whether you're a native speaker, a learner, or just curious about how language reflects culture, this conversation will give you a deeper appreciation for Hebrew and maybe even teach you a few new words that you'll want to try out. Elon, thank you so much for coming on Sababoosh.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
Same here. We're going to really dive into the world of Hebrew and slang and get to know more about something that you seem very passionate about. So I thought we would start with, where does that fascination come from? Like, how did you get into studying Hebrew and learning the history?
It's actually quite random, to be honest. I was working at Haaretz at the lowest position job I could find, which was doing the night shift. Nobody wanted to do the night shift. You sit alone in the building, and just in case there's news, you have to report on it on the website. I took that job, and I was working there. I was studying political science and philosophy, so nothing was pointing me towards linguistics or anything like that. But I happened to move to Luntz Street in Tel Aviv. It's off Rothschild, a little street right next to Habima. Terrific location, a very shoddy building, very gross apartment with a lot of roommates, but I was very happy to have it. And when I moved there, I looked up to see who's this Luntz guy and why did he warrant a street in the center of Tel Aviv, and looked him up, Wikipedia. And he's the scholar from the 19th century, not a very interesting person, published some things, but the most interesting thing I found about him is that he coined the word chatzil, eggplant. And I thought that was fascinating, this random guy. He came up with the word for eggplant, and everyone's using it and not even thinking about him. So I said, wow, I wonder if I can find out who came up with the word for tomato, or gvania. Oh, sure enough, Google. Well, very quickly I find out it's a guy named Rabbi Penis. That's his name. And I thought that was really great. So I wrote a few columns, 3 columns, as like a suggestion for a column for the weekend section at Haaretz. The editor loved it, started publishing them, and I've been doing that nearly every week for 12 years now.
It's really amazing going through your videos. Like, it's one thing to think about the low-hanging fruit of your most common average slang that people want to know about, sababa, and like your classic list of birthright slang that you would come in with. And you're exploring either everyday terms that people have no idea what the history is. I remember you explored pitzuchia, like the nut store, and you gave such great historic background, and you're doing something really special and doing it on social media and really giving over this love of the language. I'm wondering, what do you see as Hebrew, like the history of Hebrew can tell us a lot about the Israel of the past. What does it really tell us about today's Israel and Israeli society, whether that's slang or how people use the language?
I'm interested less in words that are maybe interesting linguistically, although those are interesting too. I'm more interested in Hebrew words that can tell a story about who we are, who Jews are particularly. Because I find our story to be, it's just the best story. I don't know if it's the best religion, the best people, but we have the best story. And I look for words that tell that story. And now you asked in particular about words that tell our current story. And they do. You mentioned sababa. So, yeah, there's a lot of Hebrew words in Hebrew slang, are like sababa and mistalbet. All those words come from Arabic, but they don't come from the local Palestinian dialect, our neighbors' Arabic. They come from the dialects of Jewish dialects from Morocco, Egypt, Iraq, etc. And that tells us a lot about Israeli society and the changes and the rifts in it, because when Hebrew was first started, it was mostly started by Ashkenazi Jews. The people who immigrated here and really got things going were, not all, but for the most part, Jews from Eastern Europe. And that began to change when the country was founded, because when right after 48, many Jews immigrated from the Arab world, and this giant wave of immigration continued all the way into the 60s. And really what started as a mostly Ashkenazi population became about half and half. And this really changed the culture of Israel. In the beginning, I'll give an example outside of the language, Israeli food was Eastern European food. That would be the normal restaurants you would go to, and that's what people ate at home. But as we move ahead, and today Israeli food is Middle Eastern food, so that population that enriched the country brought with it its culture, and it changed the culture of what it is to be Israeli. And the same thing happened with language. Originally, Hebrew was mostly influenced by Eastern European languages, but those people that came from the Arab world, they were speaking Arabic at home. And their children who were already Hebrew speakers, they, in their Hebrew speech, they used Arabic terms. And those terms entered the common language in the late 70s, early 80s. So words that are common say now and are akhla, sababa, and those came in at that period, and they came from the Arab world. So you can see how in that period, that was also a period where the Ma'apach happened, where the Likud took over power, which happened to a great extent due to Jews becoming the big part of the electorate, and also the Black Panthers, which is a movement. So all that is happening, and the fact that Israeli slang today is mostly Arabic, that is because that segment of Israeli society is asserting itself and becoming a more dominant part of Israeli society.
With a lot of Arabic showing up in slang, you also see today English. People say relocation and whatever and never mind. And you also see Russian, French. How do those pop up? How do we agree to use them?
You can, one of my favorite examples, oh my God, you hear quite a bit. And in English, this is, I don't want to say it's a problem. It's a phenomenon that happens in all world languages. Also the French, who are very proud of their languages, also filling up within English. This is just what happens. It's the dominant language in the world. It comes with technology, use of computers. The world is much smaller, internet, and also American movies. We're all living in the periphery of the United States, which is good in some ways and less good in other ways. So yeah, Hebrew is definitely being enriched by English words, sometimes in a delightful way. A lot of words that come in from English are assimilated into Hebrew and become roots and become verbs. For example, so you have configuration. So it's configuratia and leconfig. So Hebrew has a way through its root system to take English words and turn them into their own. And this is not something new. In the Mishnah, you find many Greek words. Afikomen is a Greek word, and many words that entered Hebrew during that period. Now, this is because the Mishnah was compiled during the Roman period, and Rome was split linguistically. So in the West, the language of the Roman Empire was Latin, but in the East, which includes the Galilee, they spoke Greek. So the Greek language was the international language of the time, and it really changed Hebrew, and the language got enriched with a lot of Greek terms. Before that, we have a lot of Aramaic coming in, because Aramaic was the English of the Near East for something like 1,000 years. And Aramaic has an extremely profound effect on the Hebrew language. And to a great extent, we're speaking Hebrew and Aramaic at the same time when we speak Hebrew today.
It's pretty awesome to learn, because so many people who don't learn Talmud or don't learn works that are based on Aramaic, they think that their Hebrew is so separate from that. But just think of the example in law, like the lawyers, and in legal terms, there's also a lot of Aramaic. So it's really popping up.
Yeah, in legal speak, in the same way that in English you would use all kinds of Latin phrases and terms. So the same thing happens in Hebrew with Aramaic terms. Lawyers, when they study law here, they also have to take like Jewish law as a part of their studies. And the people who built the Israeli legal system, they were aware of the fact that we were really inheriting British common law, but they wanted to make it Jewish because it's a Jewish state. So while we did take on common law, and Israeli law is British common law, there is quite a bit of influence and this was done on purpose. In other words, it was for the lawyers. Many of these lawyers were actually German, but they put in a lot of effort to make it more Jewish, which includes using a lot of terms which came in. And since Jewish law is based on the Talmud, and the Talmud is mostly Aramaic, though there is quite a bit of Hebrew in it, but the language of the Talmud is Aramaic, and Babylonian Aramaic at that. So a lot of terms came in from there. But it's even more profound than actual words, Aramaic words that you can still feel that they're Aramaic. That's one thing. But also a lot of Hebrew words are actually Aramaic words that were turned Hebrew and came in. Another example of the effectiveness is probably the most profound effect, how the letter bet can be pronounced a B or a V, and Daled used to be pronounced a D and a TH. Kaf, all that came in actually through Aramaic. It was by the influence of Aramaic that Hebrew changed in a very profound way. In other words, we got the F sound just because of Aramaic that had the F sound. Before that, we only had a P. It really changed language. And also the actual dying of Hebrew, when Hebrew died, in the sense that it stopped being a spoken language. It was still very much alive and used, but it wasn't the native language of anyone. It died because Aramaic pushed it out. In other words, Jews were speaking Aramaic more and more until there wasn't anyone left who actually spoke Hebrew at home and grew up speaking Hebrew. So Aramaic is very much a big influence on our language. And also even into the modern period, when the people who were coming up with words for the language, when they couldn't find a word in Hebrew, they would often take a word in Aramaic and turn it into a Hebrew word. I'll give one example. The Hebrew word for eel, tzlofach, actually comes from an Aramaic word that appears only once in the Talmud. The story, which isn't particularly fascinating, is that one of the rabbis of the Talmud comes to a town, and these two guys come and bring him a fish. And they want to know if the fish is kosher or not. Now, that fish, the Talmud tells us, is tzalfocha. We don't know what a tzalfocha is. That word only appears in that one place in the Talmud. It's not recorded in other Aramaic dialects. So the only reason we think we know what it is because Rashi and Rabbi Natan, who wrote a very important dictionary of the Talmud, both say that it's an eel. So in the 19th century, when Mendele Mocher Sfarim, a very important 19th century author of both Yiddish and Hebrew, he was looking for a word for eel. He couldn't find one in Hebrew. So he took that Aramaic word, turned it from tzlofacha into tzlofach, and to this day, that's what we call eels.
As a quick aside, it's funny that in Tel Aviv, on the street that has like Molly Bloom's bar and it's near the beach, it's called Rehov Mendele Mocher Sfarim. And it's just like such a different, like fun nightlife and rich history of Yiddish
right next
history.
to it, you have also Mapo. He's another 19th century author. So it's a whole area that's really a party area right by the beach and a lot of bars. I think I used to be a bartender. The first place I worked was on a Mendele Mocher Sfarim, not Molly's, another smaller one. And yeah, it's one of the fun things I think about not only Tel Aviv, many cities, is that you walk around and it's Zionism's greatest hits, all the streets, which, as I said, that's what caused me to find my calling by living on Lund Street. I think it's great.
I'm really curious. You mentioned that in order speaking the language like as it is, or when we add new words, it's adding to Hebrew, happens in various ways. And one of those ways, the Academy of the Hebrew Language. And I'm wondering the dynamic that happens between like them choosing words versus what's being spoken on the streets. Like I remember a Hebrew teacher during study abroad called it like in the shuk, like how are they speaking on the streets? Like how there are official words, like quirky isn't the official Hebrew word, but there is galgalon, or there are all of these things where Israelis don't necessarily follow the words if they're not a saba or safta.
Yeah, so there's an interesting dynamic in the story behind this. So really this has to do with the story of Hebrew, and as the unique story of Hebrew is being from a dead language, from the culture language, a literary language, a language where people prayed and read the Torah and sent letters in that language, but didn't speak it, to a language that's spoken at home. So that process, it was a revolutionary process and was understood by the people who were doing it as a revolutionary process. It was tied up with the story of Zionism, and before that with the Jewish Enlightenment, Haskalah. So people were very much aware that new words needed to be created. And they were created by authors and journalists and linguists and doctors and all kinds of people, because it was something that people were doing. But once Hebrew did become a spoken language, that revolutionary process, it just seemed ridiculous. So we're talking into the first years of the state, when Israel was founded in 48. The arms of the government, including the army, were busy filling up the words that needed to be filled up. So all kinds of people, there were committees, etc. And the Committee of the Hebrew Language had actually disbanded by then, and the Academy of the Hebrew Language would only be formed later through law and funding. And then I think this is in the late 50s, maybe 57 or 59, the Academy of the Hebrew Language was founded. By the time the Academy was founded, it was already too late. In other words, Hebrew was already a spoken language, and the younger generation they were already native speakers. They didn't feel that they were part of a revolutionary process. They were just speaking Hebrew. There was already a Hebrew. And for somebody to come around and say, oh, we can't use this word, it's not Hebrew, we actually have to come up with a new word, that didn't seem so important. Who are we trying to impress? We already have a Jewish state. It's already a state where people speak Hebrew. Before that, this was important because it was reviving the Hebrew language was a part of our claim on the country, a return to our country. But once that had already happened, it was already pointless and seemed funny. So journalists already didn't feel obligated or any to come up with a new word. They were just, if there was a word that's not in Hebrew, we'll just use it, whatever. So there's a few words that come from other languages. And the Academy that was chasing people and chasing words. Oh, don't say this word, don't say that word. It seemed like something from the past. And they were mostly older people that were still part of the generation that actually did this. Yes, the Academy of the Hebrew Languages comes up with words. Maybe I'll give another example of a word. In 1952, the head of the Air Force and also the head of the language committee inside the army, Leskov, general, very well-known general in Israel, he came up with the word gibui is backing. The translation, the word for back is gav, so backing is gibui. That made sense. It came in the army. A lot of words come from the army and spread out. The army is very important in Israeli society and also in the Hebrew language. So the word spread. Then in 1960, after the word was already used by everyone, the Academy of the Hebrew Language decided that word cannot be used. It needs to be stamped out. For one, they had a problem with the fact that we were translating an English word. Just because the word for backing in English happens to be related to back doesn't mean it has to be also related to gav in Hebrew. We shouldn't be mimicking English in everything we do. And more importantly, it was grammatically incorrect. Why? We have nouns formed from roots like nisui, which is an experiment from lenasot, to try. That makes sense, and that's a proper word. So why not gibui from legabot? You would think that that's fine too. It's the same structure. The thing is that nisui comes from lenasot because the last letter of the root, we have 3-letter roots too. Whoever doesn't know. So the last letter is a yud, and therefore the proper way to create a noun from that is gibui. But gav comes from the root gimel bet. So it's a different kind of root, and that would actually form a noun givu. So gibui is just the wrong kind of noun to create it, and therefore had to be stamped out. They came up with Aramaic word, timuchin, and because the government is supposed to follow the academy in official government documents and in the legal system, that word did come in to some extent. But the public discontinued using gibui and ignored them. All the way in the 90s, when the same gibui began to be used for backup, eventually, I think this is in 92, no, in the 2000s, the Academy accepted gibui as backup, and then later they accepted it for backing. So eventually, it's not the Academy that makes the decision. It's the public that makes the decision, and retroactively, the Academy will approve it. You can count maybe on 2-3 hands the number of words that the Academy came up with and actually entered the language and people use in a regular capacity. There's all kinds of reasons, but one of them is the fact that they're a very slow process. If gibui was coined in 52 and only in 1960 they made a decision, that's many years too late to stamp out a word. And that slowness is still an aspect of the Academy of the Hebrew Language today.
In one of your videos, you talk about finding the word for a musical hit and that progression until it was eventually a radio DJ had already been using lahit, and that how is that maybe different from the more official process where different people are suggesting, I think one of them was kaftor for button.
This, I believe we're talking about in the 60s, if I remember. And people were using Schlager being the German word for a musical hit. And this is a problem. So actually some journalists did try to replace it, but they use the word, it didn't catch on. And eventually the Academy decided to go in and try to replace the word. And once again, there was a committee, they made suggestions, they voted, they decided not to use whatever they were. And in the meantime, a radio personality, very famous, Rivka Michaeli, she's a very famous Israeli celebrity. She was young at the time, and she was hosting a radio show that was called The Hit Parade, which was Israel's top 20. And she just came up with the word lahit, from the root lahat, which means to burn red hot. And she just used it on air. And when you use something on air, everyone hears it, especially in those days when people actually listen to radio. So that word just spread. And eventually the guys at the Academy heard about it and they just accepted it as the word. Their suggestions were just like, you know what, I want to say that they weren't catchy, but really they didn't have the platform to get the word used. And Rivka Michaeli would have said kaftor. It's a weird word to choose because it already means button. But perhaps if you would have used kaftor, that would have been the word for hit. We have words that have more than one meaning. That's not the end of the world. But the Academy doesn't really have a platform, so they can take out they have a journal that they put out, but not who reads the Academy's journal or their little magazine flyer that they take out. Only people who are obsessed with the Hebrew language, maybe the Hebrew teachers, some professors. They don't have the platform to really control language. And when they make a decision, there's no way to enforce it, because people don't change the way they speak. They just speak the way they speak. So it's somewhat pointless, but I want to say I don't think that the Academy is pointless. They do have very important work. Hebrew does not have a proper dictionary, and Hebrew deserves a proper dictionary, and they are working on it. I wish they would put all their resources on, instead of policing the language, on doing the dictionary, because I think it's a shanda that Israel and Hebrew, we don't have a proper dictionary like other people, because our language is beautiful and historic and fascinating, not only for us, but also for other people. And the fact that the Swedish Academy put out a dictionary of the Swedish language, and we haven't, is a shame.
This is something I've been wondering for a long time. You mentioned working at Haaretz. In newspapers, there's High Hebrew that's used. If the majority of Israelis don't speak that way, why is such a more formal, I guess, different languages have, maybe with Ethiopian people, there's a written language and a spoken language, but that doesn't, why use Higher Hebrew?
It's what we call register. You have different registers, and everyone does this. Everyone code switches, depending where they are. You don't speak the same way at a bowling alley as you would speak at court. With a judge, you have to speak your best English, your most proper English. You won't curse or etc. So there's the same expectation in people working in the news. So on radio, on television, and also in written form. When a book is published, it's edited. When a newspaper is published, an editor whose job is to correct the language goes over it. And I think a part of it is that media sees itself as a part of their work to educate people and to teach them the proper way to use the language. And I know they put a lot of effort on that on television and radio. Television anchors, regular people, will say things that normal people would never say, including me. And I may sometimes know the correct way to speak, but I would never speak that way. I think about it when I raise my children. We speak English at home, but once in a while Hebrew will come up. And I would never tell them to speak the correct way, because they don't want to be the weirdos who speak the correct way. They want to be the real correct way is the way actual people speak. If they decide to go into media and become news anchors, they'll do what all news anchors do. They'll study and they'll learn how to speak correctly, and they'll get notes from the person in charge of the language in the station, who'll make sure that they pronounce the verb himtzi, and not hemtzi, for example, which is a big problem in Hebrew.
Does it bother you to the extent that if someone misuses the word, or even if you don't correct them, you really wish that you could correct them? Or it's not such a sensitivity?
I would never correct anyone. Not only, and I used to. It used to be something I did all the time, not in language. In general, I love correcting people. I learned that people don't want to be corrected. It's better to shut up. If they want to say something correctly or want the facts, they should go and study it. They don't want me to tell them. So that's just personally speaking. Secondly, I don't speak correctly. There's masculine, feminine. I constantly get that wrong. Maybe because my native language is English, even though I grew up here. I just don't have the sensitivity to hear. So definitely if somebody else gets the masculine, feminine wrong, I'm not going to correct them, because that'll be me next time. Though I do appreciate when somebody else does correct me, because I don't want to make mistakes, especially in my field. I gave this lecture once at like a language conference in Rishon. They have annual Hebrew festival or something. So they had me to speak there. And I made some masculine, feminine mistake. And in that crowd, that's a big deal. You could hear the gasp in the crowd when I don't even remember what the word was. And like, okay, big deal, guys. So what? Who cares?
Something that I've noticed a lot is for an Israeli who speaks fluent English, plural and singular, I was in Peru for 5 months. That's just like, no matter what, someone speaks perfect English, but that's just like a...
That's also something that in Hebrew is perhaps in flux with the same reason we spoke before with the slang, because there's like the proper way you would say Chamisha Chodashim, or Chamsha Shkalim. But the improper way, which is this improper because that's how it's done in Arabic, is that you say Chamesh Shekel. So once again, that's just if it's a dialect exactly, but there's like a Mizrahi dialect in Hebrew, and that's the Mizrahi dialect taking over because that's becoming the more dominant part of Israeli society. I guess that carries over to English when you speak. In general, I think it's just Israelis who are not native and English speakers have a hard time with a foreign language. I know I do. I've studied many languages and I can't speak any of them. So any Israeli that picked up English and is able to have a conversation, I think is amazing, because I've studied French, I've studied German, I've studied Yiddish. I can't have a conversation in any of those. So for any Israeli who speaks English, I think it's amazing.
It really is amazing. It's not a simple thing when someone studies and listens, develops a new way of expressing themselves. It's pretty cool.
My wife is Ola. She made Aliyah many years ago. And her Hebrew isn't perfect, but I'm amazed at how it improves and how good her Hebrew is, because it's so hard to learn another language when you're an adult later in life. And every time I hear her speak, I'm amazed. It's really incredible. I wish I had an aptitude for that. Some people are maybe better at that. I'm not one of them.
You just mentioned that the Mizrahi part of society is becoming the more dominant type, and maybe the Ashkenazi part of society is just maybe starting to speak in that way. What do you see as the evolution of that? Like in 50 years, this is a time machine, we're transported 50 years. What do you think the Hebrew of then will sound like?
So, yeah, it's not that aspects, Ashkenazi or Eastern European or whatever, aspects of Israeli society will disappear and will be replaced. What's happening is a merging. Maybe another example is music. When I was growing up, Israeli music was like rock music. And now, like, it's Eastern music is Israeli music. And I don't know if you call that Eastern music, whatever that is. But it's not like Arab music. It's a mixture of Arab music and rock music. There's a merging of a creation out of the mix and the chaos, the balagan of Israeli society is hopefully creating something new. Israeli society isn't one society. We're a bunch of quite different groups forced together in a very small country, and we're rubbing against each other, and it doesn't feel so nice. And I'm hoping we find a way forward that works for everyone. To be honest, I don't think it will work for everyone. There probably needs to be some, like a civil war, but some force used between the different groups in order to create something homogenous or semi-homogenous that can move forward. It's because Israel's a new society, and this takes time. I'm assuming, though I don't know, that, let's say, early Canadians were not all one group, and it took a while to create two Canadian cultures, that the French and the English, that live side by side. And perhaps one day it won't be French and English, and they'll all be one group. We'll see. Time will tell.
Definitely, yeah. And also with food, like a lot of people from Ashkenazi backgrounds might enjoy eating kuba or different spices that are traditionally seen as more Mizrahi, and maybe not as much the other way around. The other direction doesn't really work. You can't get like a Moroccan Israeli to eat gefilte fish, though they're totally missing out, because I love gefilte fish. Good gefilte fish is one of the best things there is. It just has a stigma against it that it's terrible, but one of my favorite things. Go out and try some gefilte fish if you haven't. Definitely. Are you like the jar type or the loaf type?
The best is the loaf type if you can get it. I don't really know where I could get that. I would have to drive to Bnei Brak on a Thursday night to get the really good stuff, but I'm happy to eat the jar stuff. I eat a lot of it. There's better jar stuff, less good jar stuff. Really, I need to learn to make it myself. It's just such a hassle.
I guess that would involve fish in the bathtub, or you're saying not quite that far back, like getting the fish and then preparing it? Or?
I think I can ask the fishmonger to chop it up for me. But fish in the bathtub sounds nice. It's what my ancestors did when they had a bath.
Yeah, it's a throwback to the ancestors. Okay, before we move into this last segment, what is your favorite slang word or expression to use, or just one that you use a lot or you enjoy hearing?
Once again, I mostly speak English, so we're talking about a Hebrew slang word. Maybe stalbit. I think I like stalbit. It's somewhat I don't know how I would translate it exactly. It's a form of relaxation, or to stalbit is to do not quite nothing, but to be very mellow and hang out in a mellow way, which I think is very Israeli. Also, I like hanging out in a mellow way. And yeah, stalbit is a great word. It's not the most common. Also has quite a nice story. Comes from Egyptian Arabic and originally from Greek. So that's a great word, stalbit.
That is a great one that's not as well known. There is a full trunk song, Stalbit Ba Kibbutz, which is like a fun, funky song. So you could hear it there. Okay, so as we wind down, we're going to enter a segment called Te'imot, samples, tastings. And as opposed to the lightning round, it's not going to be like you fire away your answers. I have time to explain. I'd love to get to know why you like this TV show or that author. And we'll also put all of your choices, all the choices of the guests on the website so that people have a great list of restaurants to try out in Jerusalem or movies to watch. So just little samples of things that you love. So to start out, your favorite Israeli food.
Favorite Israeli food? Gotta be sabich. Sabich I think, is the national dish of Israel. If you ask Israelis what the national dish of Israel, they'll tell you it's falafel. But falafel is eaten in Egypt and in Lebanon and everywhere in the Middle East. It's not special Israeli. Sabich is uniquely Israeli. Let me explain what it is. It's a pita with inside it salads, hummus, fried eggplant, a hard-boiled egg that's muddled up and cut into little pieces, boiled potato, also muddled inside, parsley with trina on top, sometimes amba. I recommend amba. That's like a mango chutney kind of thing. It's very good. It's a street food. It's uniquely Israeli, and I think it's delicious.
It's a great one. I don't like eggplant, but I like sabich, like something with all of the mixture of flavors. Favorite Israeli singer?
Perhaps Meir Ariel. He's already long gone. He's dead. And, I think he's from the 70s or something, but he is a poet. His singing is maybe not the best aspect of him, but each one of his songs is a poem, and the command of the language is beautiful, and the ideas, and Israel doesn't exist anymore. Maybe a Butznik kind of culture that is on its way out, if not out altogether. And it reminds me of my military service. He was already dead when I was in the army, but somehow his songs were very popular in my unit, which was also made up with quite a bit of people from kibbutzim. I'm not a kibbutznik, but I think that would have been the anthem of my period then. And very nice. And if you're listening to him the first time, so start with his biggest hit, and also beautiful song, Neshel HaNachash. It's a very nice song.
It really has a certain charm that the pop of today is moving away from, but really that like a sweet feeling.
I don't know.
How about favorite author?
Favorite Israeli author. I'll preface this by saying that I don't read a lot of literature. I mostly read scholarly works. They could be less scholarly, but usually they're about things that are real. History books, maybe philosophy once in a while, sociology, stuff like that, less stories. And also, when I do read, it is mostly in English, to be honest. But let's try to think what I've read in Hebrew that I really enjoyed. I think I've read some Meir Shalev books, which I thought really nice. Maybe the last time I really enjoyed reading literature. Yeah, maybe Meir Shalev. Also more past writing. I'm giving my age here. I'm not as young as I used to be. I'll go with Meir Shalev.
Okay, great. And finally, favorite vacation spot, whether that's for a holiday or a Friday getaway.
I like camping. My wife doesn't, and my kids, they complain, but they really like it. And so there's quite a bit of good camping sites in Israel. Israel is a beautiful and diverse country. So there's a lot of great places you could go and pitch a tent with bathrooms and stuff. We're not going to go into some area we can't use a normal bathroom. And I really enjoyed quite recently, Masada has a tent spot. It's right in it's the side of Masada. It's in the desert, far away from the Dead Sea. So you can't get from there to the Dead Sea, but it means you're closer to the top of Masada, so you don't have to climb the whole way up. It's only halfway up, and it's a beautiful desert, and the sunrise there is exquisite, and you can walk up to Masada in the morning, and it's peaceful and beautiful, and I really like it there.
That sounds amazing. Elon, thank you so much for coming on Sababoosh.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for an educational conversation on the history and evolution of modern Hebrew with Elon Gilad. You can catch him on TikTok and YouTube for more lessons about Hebrew, slang, and the history of the language, and the history of Israel. Next time on Sababoosh, we're hitting the road with Yair Agamon, writer, filmmaker, and storyteller behind the hit show on Kan, HaTrempistim, or The Hitchhikers. We'll talk about the culture of tremping, hitchhiking in Israel, the stories that emerge along the roadside, and what they reveal about Israeli society. Stay tuned. It's going to be a wild ride. Stay connected with us. Follow Sababoosh on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode, and check out our website, sababoosh.com, where you can also subscribe to our Substack. We've already published over 50 articles on Israeli culture, everything from Eurovision to the slang term sachi, and we're adding more all the time. If you enjoy the show, please take a moment to rate and review Sababoosh on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Your feedback really helps us reach more people. We're also excited to share that Sababoosh now offers opportunities to bring Israeli culture directly into your community or program. From talks and webinars to workshops and courses, we love engaging with groups in a more interactive way. Our current offerings include Intro to Israeli Culture, Israeli Music After October 7th, and Shtisel and Chill, a look at Israeli culture through TV. If this sparks interest for your community, campus, or gap year program, feel free to reach out. We'd love to collaborate. You can find more information on sababoosh.com. We've got some exciting guests coming up, and I'd love to hear from you. Send your comments, ideas, or guest suggestions anytime to jake@sababoosh.com. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the Sababoosh community.